Hello, Connection Coders, and welcome to the Connection Codes podcast, where we break open our emotions that take us from feeling disconnected to connected in our relationships and with ourselves. Before we get into this episode, I want to tell you about a free resource currently on our website. You can go to connectioncodes.co, put in your email address, and join in for a free class that we are currently offering to get you started on your Connection Codes journey. In this episode, we are going to break down trigger topics. These are the topics that every couple deals with, but we learn to avoid because they tend to be pretty spicy and not a good way in our house. Things can get a little heated when these core words come up. I am your producer, Tierra Wages, and I'm excited to introduce you to the founders of the Connection Codes, marriage and family therapist, clinical sexologist, Dr. Glenn Hill and Phyllis Hill. Thank y'all so much.
Hello, world.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes. Hey, friends. Thank you,
Tierra.
Tierra. Yeah, always love being able to connect this way with just the things that we feel really passionate about. And, you know, talking about trigger topics, it would be kind of fun if our listeners could, you know, call in. We don't have that yet going on.
One day.
But but you could definitely send us a message, send us a note. We'd love to hear what your trigger topics are. You know, I don't think ours have ever changed. We've been married 40 years this July. And if someone asks me, well, what have been or what are now, and it's like, it's always been two. I would say since the beginning of our marriage. And the two trigger topics for us have been sex and my family of origin. And, you know, thankfully, with the Connection Codes, we now are able to talk about both topics without a disconnect. And so thankful for that.
Yeah, it's amazing to me because they were trigger topics, 35 years ago, and it would be a 3.5 week, literally, which is stunning to me thinking back. I'm like, well, what morons would do a pain experience for 3.5 weeks? But we did all the time. Everything was days, weeks, when we'd have a disconnect because we were so clueless and, of course, didn't have the tools at the time. We just had no idea how to navigate any of this. So the topics are still there and they can still be volatile, but we literally process through it in 30 seconds, 20 seconds, which, as I say so often, it boggles my mind. And we look at each other like, really? That's the way it could be? That's the way it could have been? It is. It's that simple. One of the things that we did, which I think most couples do, is we just learned how not to talk about stuff. And so somewhere around 10, 12, whatever, maybe 15 years into our marriage, things settled a lot. We didn't have as intense of conflicts, and we thought that meant our relationship was getting better. But we just learned not to talk about stuff, the things that mattered to us. And so we didn't fight as much. So we're like, oh, look at this, we're winning, this is great. But in reality, we were just living more and more parallel and not engaging on a deep level. And I think that's what a lot of couples do. I see so often. And the list for many couples is long. They have quite a few topics they just don't touch. And so basically they're just roommates and they co-parent, and that's about the extent of their relationship, their involvement. Which is so heartbreaking because that's not why they married. That was not their plan.
Well, early on, I remember that we would get into fights over my family, and I was so bewildered by that. Like, I didn't understand how that topic could become such a cyclone and so fast. And, it took many years before we were able to actually have a conversation in a safe way about it. And I realized that I was raised in Germany. So seeing family was not just an easy thing as far as, I had siblings, but even when my siblings left home to go to college, they always came to the United States. And so then many of them, I wouldn't see again for a long time. But I remember when we would come back to the States, my dad, who was from a large family, would always see his family. And it never occurred to me that my mom didn't see her family. I didn't even realize that. But my dad made sure that we would, like, our vacations were always to go see family. And, you know, when I married you, I just thought that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go see family on your vacation. You're supposed to, you know, go to every possible event, from graduations to weddings and, you know, to a sporting event, no matter how far you had to drive. And I just thought that is the way you function in a healthy way. Well, you came from a family where that was not how you were raised, or especially because your dad died when you were 8. I think that if your dad had you know, lived, maybe that would have been more your experience, where you would have gone to see his siblings.
Right.
But because he died so young, you don't have those memories. And so for you, it wasn't based on what you grew up with. And so what I tended towards just automatically was to go see my family. And so you were more the outsider, which, you know, granted, my family didn't do a good job embracing outsiders. So, and I know that in just talking with my siblings over the years, you know, all of their spouses felt the same way. They all felt like they were the outsiders. So, you know, that was, some families function better definitely than ours, but our family, you know, did not show that. But then you also saw that your confusion was in how they would treat me. And so that was confusing to you. Like, why are we driving across the United States to see family that don't really seem like they care that you showed up or that you drove this far? And why don't they ever come and see us? And I just could not handle even the possibility that you were right. Yeah. And so I would be so hurt by your simple question that we would have the biggest fights. And it didn't stop us, though, from going to see family, because I held on to that for years and years, that is just what you do. That is the right thing to do. And I never considered all of the other pieces to it. And so it is just really, I know with a lot of you listeners, you have those topics that immediately cause so much pain that it's like you're not even able to really dissect how, at what point of the intersection do you go into this deep pain well? And then over the years, it's almost like it became at a high cost. You know, like it was one of those where eventually it's like, I think especially as I got older, our kids got older, I would be like, you know what, I'll go see my family and you don't need to come. Like, I'll just go by myself. It's like we danced around it because it was such a trigger. It triggered into such disconnection. And, you know, I think it took for us to be safe with each other emotionally, where we were able to make space for it all so that we could have a conversation where we were able to say, this is what happens for me. This is what in this situation happens. Right. And, you know, I don't know that over the years I was able to hear your perspective because I immediately felt like I had to defend. Right. Yep. I had to defend what I believed in. And for me to question that maybe there was truth in what you were saying would just unravel my whole belief on family. And then I realized, you know, it wasn't until, gracious, I don't know how old I was, an adult, many years of marriage, before I realized that just because my dad did something in a certain way doesn't make that right, or that is the way or the best way. And so I had done so much damage by not listening to you and just shutting you out. And I know that a lot of it was fear driven, that I felt so much fear to just have that conversation with you. Because I thought, no, this is where I receive value. This is where I receive identity. Like, I want to know that my family of origin loves me. Like, there was so much value put into that for me.
And I remember so many times, the one event where we'd gone to a graduation of one of your nephews, and we drove like 1,500 miles to get there. And I remember that year we had a Volkswagen bus with no air conditioning that we were
I
driving to
remember that.
Texas.
Woo.
Not the funnest trip ever,
no.
but we got there and we pull up in front of your nephew's family's house, and we go to the door, and they didn't even answer the door. And finally, we knocked a bit, and then finally we just kind of walked in. The door's unlocked, and they're watching TV. And they weren't watching some riveting, Marvel movie or something. They were watching, I don't remember, like a rerun of Gilligan's Island or something. I'm just like, what in the world? And they didn't even get up to open the door. They didn't even speak to us because they're too busy. They're engrossed in this rerun of Gilligan's Island. And there were a number of turning points, but that was one of those where I'm like, wow, we have no value to them. But it was so ingrained in you, almost DNA level, that, oh, no, family is everything. Family is good. Family is right. And I'm observing this going, oh my gosh, they didn't hug her. They didn't greet her. There were no smiles, no, oh, we're so glad you're here. We can't believe you did that drive. That's amazing. It was just completely engaging, but you were experiencing it as positive simply because it is a biological relative. Right. Whereas I'm observing it from the outside going, what in the heck is happening here? There's no value in this. Certainly for me, as an outsider, and I very much felt like an outsider and intruder, but I couldn't get what was happening for you, how this was a positive experience. And I have no idea how many, it was countless trips like that at virtually every opportunity. And of course, as you mentioned, over time we noticed, we don't like using the word never, they never come to any of our family activities, weddings, graduations, anything. So like, And again, that was so hard for you, and there was so much pain in it for you to start to realize that. And I remember so many tears for you when you started realizing, oh, wow, I guess maybe they don't care. I'm certain that they do care about me, and yet what all the evidence says, they don't. I'm not really that valuable to them, which is so tough.
Yeah. I think about, as you're sharing that because I hear conversations that Wes and I have had, and then I hear conversations that I've heard my friends have with each other. And in those moments, and what y'all were doing at that time, you were talking logistics.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
You were saying, do we have to go visit them? Why do we have to go visit them? And you asking that question, which was an innocent question, Phyllis is feeling attacked of, you don't like my family. You're not even trying. You don't respect us. Yeah. Where if we could turn this around and get to the core of it, like what we're teaching people to do, if you could have been able to say at that time, I have a lot of sadness when I'm with your family because I don't see them valuing who you are. I know how incredible you are, but I don't see that value that they are putting on you. Yeah. And then Phyllis could have come back and be like, I get that. I hear you. I have joy when I'm with my family because they're my family of origin. And even though it's painful at times, there's ultimately joy there as well. And you could have met each other there. And we've missed on that so many times. Anytime we're arguing of whose house are we going to at Christmas and, where are we going to go visit who and how they act, if we could talk about the emotion of what we're experiencing, all of that cycle could have been cut out. And that's with every trigger topic that we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting, with that particular situation, because I didn't have Connection Codes language, I was not able to communicate to Glenn what was happening for me. He didn't communicate what was happening for him. Right. But I was not able to communicate to my family of origin what was happening. Yeah. And so I would say to this day, don't really know what was happening for them when we would come and visit. And we would all just pretend like we liked each other to some degree, like we were cordial. But it was not the depth of care and concern that I wanted for my immediate family, for our children. We wanted to instill within them a very different behavior as how much they show up for each other. And it's interesting because now all of our children are grown and have children of their own. And to see that as they live life together, as they show up for each other, and not always in a perfect way. Our kids are very different from each other, and there are times when I remember going through this in the last couple of years with one of my daughters, where she brought it to my attention that I interrupt her a lot. And I love that she can say that to me. Like, I love that she can express the pain in that. And it's made me very aware of that particular part. And I know my heart, like, it's out of excitement. I'm so excited to see her or see all of them, especially when they're together as a group, that I just burst into the room and I immediately start talking. I don't even notice that I've interrupted anyone. It's because I'm so excited to be there. But her making me aware of it, and in the moment, she'll go, Mom, you interrupted. I stop. I go, oh, guilt. And then I just lean into what she is saying. And then I'm able, to even follow up later. And I think, my family of origin didn't have that at all. And I actually had a conversation with my sister just a couple of years ago, maybe last year even, that took us back 40 years to an incident that happened when I was 17. And it's the first time we've talked about that incident. And she said, I judged you in that incident, and I've held that against you your whole entire life. 40 years we've lost because of that. And she had a lot of remorse about that she said, I never asked you your side. I never found out what was really going on with you during that time in your life. And I thought, man, that's how so many families function, is they don't have a language. And, we get these testimonies all the time. Matter of fact, we just got one this week of someone who's new to the Connection Codes. And she said, after hearing you guys speak, I bought your book, I read your book, and I had a conversation with my mom that I wished I'd had 20 years ago. And she said, it was incredible. It's the first time I've connected with my mom like that. So I know that this language can change these scenarios so much. And, we're talking about trigger topics in our marriages, but I love to think that this doesn't just help in the trigger topics within your own marriage, but it can go way beyond that, because trigger topics are true for groups. Trigger topics are true for families. Like, as far as it's not just in a, like a marriage situation where we have trigger topics. And so often we just stay away, and we hear that almost jokingly, like, oh yeah, when we get together with our aunts and uncles, shoo, don't talk politics, because then people start spitting across the room at each other. Well, that's a trigger topic. So they choose not to. Don't you dare, don't you bring it up. And, and I think, wow, it's like we don't know how to navigate with trigger topics.
Yeah. And just a Connection Code side note, talking about joy, so often with the core emotion wheel, people go, why are all the emotions negative except one, joy? But it's actually joy so often where we end up doing things that we later regret. And just like some of the situations with your family, there was so much joy just because it was family. And so you're kind of blinded to the actual experience of it. You're not even aware that that's what's happening in the moment. And therefore, you and I were not able to connect because you were unaware of me. There's just so much joy in the idea of, we're going to go do a family thing. Therefore, by definition, it's good and right and wonderful and beautiful. But in reality, it wasn't, and certainly not for the other in that situation, which happened to be me.
Right. And what I love about this is in thinking that ultimately the goal is for the entire family to speak this language.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately, that is the big picture
Absolutely.
goal. But in thinking, until we get to that point, the joy can be tricky, and you can end up in situations that are ultimately painful or toxic to you and really harmful. But right now, with couples doing the Connection Codes, the immediate goal is keeping the two of you connected through those experiences. Yeah. I know for Wes and I, we have gone through very, very difficult family trauma that almost ripped us apart. I mean, there was a point that we were in counseling before we knew y'all. I wanted a divorce, and it all stemmed back from family trauma. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, if we'd had this language in 2015 when we were going through that, he and I could have stayed the partner pair. It could have been us against the pain, not the pain and us going against each other.
Wow. Yeah.
And so looking and using this language to share with each other first, because you're the priority, and then going into that family of origin together, united, you can do that. Yeah. So what's the next trigger topic that people tend to get stuck on? I know you'd mentioned sex. I know for us, that's a big one.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I started with my family because I think that's a little more, like I can think of specific incidences, right? And so I think, wow, we had huge fights over this incident. But with sex, it was so much, like it was so big. And it was the constant trigger topic.
Yeah.
It wasn't, one family reunion a year. It was like a constant. And I know that it wasn't necessarily every day as a trigger topic, but I felt it. I think I was so afraid of that topic because that's what wrecked us on our honeymoon. And so it took, a very long time before we were able to even show up for each other in that topic without it becoming a cyclone.
Yeah, and it was always just logistics.
Yes.
Just talked about the information, the content, the facts, and the figures, which, again, as we hopefully everybody knows by now, logistics don't connect human beings. Emotions do. And now we're able to process the emotion literally in the moment as it's occurring. So these triggers, which these days don't feel like triggers. I mean, they still are the topics, but we process through it so fast that an outsider wouldn't even think that was a trigger because like, well, that lasted 25 seconds, literally 25 seconds, 15 seconds, not 3 days, which was standard for us for so many years. So it doesn't even look like a trigger, but it's just the topic itself. And there's a lot of trauma response in each of us for that because we felt so wounded. So now we have a current emotional response to a past event. So we're reacting out of something that might have happened literally 25 years ago. And so it knocks us off course, but we're able to get to the core emotion so quickly that literally we're less than 30 seconds and we've processed through it. It's amazing.
Right. And logistically, we're often coming at each other in the sex topic of how often?
Right.
How often are we not? How often are we? What kind? Even recently, I was telling Wes, let's have sex. I was initiating. I would think, oh, this is his dream for me to do this. But I said, let's bang it out. Trigger. Because to him, he heard, I just want to rush this.
Ah, yeah.
And so then we started fighting over the logistics of what we were actually even going to do. And luckily we have the codes. We were able to work through it quickly. But the logistics are the actual topics instead of coming at each other where Wes had fear that I actually didn't want to be involved and that I was trying to rush it. He had sadness that I was trying to rush it. And that's not at all. I had joy in thinking this is about to be a hot and heavy thing. And so we were arguing over what was going to happen instead of what we were feeling in that moment.
Right.
Yeah. Which is crazy because in some ways, a lot of couples would be like, oh my gosh, I'd like to get there. Where that's
true.
actually
Well, join the connection codes.
Where that's actually what we're fighting over is that it's going to be longer or, not long enough or whatever. But I think that, it is so true. And I was thinking about that. For so long, we had a scorecard.
Right.
Kind of like, oh my word, how many days has it been? And it was just to even talk about it, there were so many triggers.
Right.
And I love that now we've gotten to a place where, Glenn will so often say, I'm feeling sexual joy. And then he, shares with me what he's thinking. And then I just know. Like, I don't have to keep a scorecard. I don't have to, or he'll say, oh, I'm feeling sexual loneliness. It's been, we've been so busy. And then I just know.
Right.
And I love that where in the old days, I think I lived in this, just waiting for the, the other shoe to drop, waiting for the topic to come up. And then it's like, well, no wonder it was a trigger topic because it's like you're just waiting. And and it's like now I just know that he's going to express it in one way or the other, or I'm going to express it in one way or the other. And there's not this, like, it's almost like the mystery of that old way has been taken out, which was such a fear thing for me. Yeah. And even like if I was initiating a lot, I never knew whether, is that enough? Did I initiate enough? Wow. And so there was this, I don't know. Those were rough days for sure. And I think for a lot of couples, the trigger in that is often just because they've made it really complicated. Right. That's the thing I love about the connection codes, because if you take sex and you put it in the joy experience or the lonely experience, and you just communicate that way, it's like, oh, I don't have to guess anymore. I don't have to be on edge thinking, and the panic of it, it's just an expression. And even for Glenn, like, especially, and I think it comes more often from him than from me, is for him to express the joy. And I don't go into a panic thinking, oh my gosh, right now, he's wanting it right now. But I realize that I can acknowledge just that he's thinking about me, and that, he's experiencing joy. Joy's firing in his brain about, playing with me sexually. And it may not even happen that day because of our schedule. Or, we may not even be in the same city, and he's calling me to say that. And I'm like, I know, I can't wait till I get home. But it's not the old trigger of a massive fight.
Yeah, and the Connection Codes side point, to our perspective, we present this in the Connection Codes Late Night e-course, which if you haven't done, you should. Make sure you do the Connection Codes Foundation's e-course first. But the Late Night e-course is all about sex. And it's our perspective that sex drive, what we reference as libido so often, is actually simply a joy experience or a lonely experience, as you referenced. And for me now to be able to say to you, I'm feeling joy, and literally the three phrases, you go, oh, what's happening with joy? What am I missing? And I go, well, it's sexual joy. And you go, oh, what's happening with that? What am I missing? And then, of course, it's really cool when you throw in the fourth phrase at the end where you go, oh, so what do you need there? How can I help? And I always have great ideas for how you can help.
Sure do.
But or from the other side, for sexual loneliness, just because I miss you.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten to play together in whatever. I don't like putting numbers on things, but and it's actually such a connector. For one thing, the fact that I'm conveying at the core, that in itself is really awesome because it's authentic and vulnerable. But also, for me to say to you, I feel sexual joy, well, that's kind of tough for you to go, well, that's bad. No, you shouldn't feel sexual joy about me. We've been married too long or something. I don't know what the response might be. And for me to say sexual loneliness because I miss you. I miss getting to play with you. Well, that's tough for you to go, no, you should not be missing me sexually. Shame on you. That doesn't make any sense. And, of course, you're amazing at oohing and following the energy. But to get to that level where we can just be authentic with each other, convey at the core, that's just stunning to me because we did logistics, so much pain that it was decades, literally decades, which included thousands and thousands and thousands of times, which meant thousands and thousands and thousands of woundings. And that just doesn't need to happen. Another interesting thing about that, and we've talked about this so much the last couple of years, that I want to do this research in the future, that whenever I'm able to share with you my sexual joy, my sexual loneliness, how connecting that is.
Right.
And we didn't even have time to play.
Right.
Literally, we're on our way out the door to go to some event, some dinner or whatever. Well, it just ain't happening. And, we may not get home until midnight that night. But it's sexually connecting and deeply emotionally connecting, not because of this sexual activity, which is also thrilling and very, very fun and connecting, but just because I got to share that with you, or vice versa, just because you got to share with me what was happening with you. So I'm really intrigued by that because it doesn't make sense. And I don't know that I've ever heard that before that says, oh, just getting to share the emotion behind that's pushing the sexual drive, that is sexually connecting. That's certainly been our experience.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I look forward to more research on that topic. But what I was thinking was, when I share with you sad, and how sad in more recent years has become something that I actually I feel like it engulfs me. It feels really heavy, and when I share it, I feel it lift. And so maybe that's kind of a similar thing, which,
Right.
in the research that will come from that, I can see that would all tie together, that in all emotions, and it's interesting because you were saying, like, even you used to share about how when you would leave the office late at night, just the fear would be so intense.
Right.
And so when we would co-regulate, when you would call me, you wouldn't even experience that fear. So there's a co-regulating for sure that just lifts the intensity of that emotion. And we've definitely, I think, in this sex topic, have really in our marriages missed each other by not communicating clearly. We go to the logistics. We tend to go to the blame. Like, if I'm feeling sexual loneliness, it's your fault.
Yes.
And so we don't even word it in sexual loneliness. We just go, we've made it so that we almost set ourselves up to fail in that topic, which I think is part of why probably for many, many couples it's a trigger topic. Because we don't know how to communicate in that way that you're just now sharing. And so, I think when we talk about triggers, for us, I think those two were definitely the ones that we've had in our marriage. But I know there's others. I know that some people share that talking about money is a trigger. Finances is a trigger. And often I think when it comes to that for couples, it's because you've got two very different views of money. And we've shared that I left home when I was 17. Glenn left home when he was 14. I mentioned his dad died when he was 8. We both came probably from financially about the same as far as our family of origin.
Although I thought you were a rich kid.
Which is really funny, but I wasn't.
Well, we met at a summer camp, and she was dressed up, and everybody else had on sweatpants.
Yeah, well, that's a long story, but I was wearing my school clothes because I didn't have time to go buy summer clothes. But, it's like we married young. So I think too, we started off with the mindset that we needed to save every penny, and we both had that same mindset. And I think that now, all these years later, that's definitely not a trigger topic for us, but it is interesting that we do look at money sometimes differently. Like if I'm thinking of, we should replace the floors in the kitchen, I think that is probably harder for you. For one thing, you don't notice the floors in the kitchen. So it's definitely not something where you see it as a need. And so spending money on that, I don't think that is where your mind goes. And I've shared this before, that when it comes to investments, like if we have an opportunity to buy an Airbnb, or we own several, and if it has like, let's upgrade that, or let's put in new floors in the Airbnb, that is a automatic yes for you. Where for me, it's more of a pain point because I'm like, man, I want to put new floors in the home I live in.
Right.
And this Airbnb that I don't live in is getting new floors.
Right.
And so I think we do see that a little differently, but we're able to just talk about the topic and it doesn't trigger us into a cyclone for sure, but we see it differently,
Right.
And so I know that there are, though, huge disconnectors. That's a big one.
Yeah, for sure. And Glenn and I actually had a conversation about this recently, and I made the comment that currently in our relationship, Wes is the one that makes the money in our house, and so I feel guilt to hire the babysitter for extra days when I'm hiring her and I'm not making any money while I'm away from her. And so Glenn, I know that a lot of women, and that's not all women, that's a generalization, but oftentimes the men are working and the women are at home, and there's a lot of guilt there in that. And so share with me what you told me that day.
Well, goodness, I hope I don't miss on this.
You're
You
not
may have to
gonna
remind me. But I mean, number one, my whole positioning is that Wes is not making the money. Wes and Tira, this is a partnership,
Right.
and Phyllis and I have gone through different phases in our life. There was a time when I ran a business, not very well, but I worked hard, and our children never went hungry. But as far as I know, I don't think I ever presented it that this was my money, and I don't think you ever presented it that it was either your money or not your money. And then whenever you made me quit working to go back to school, I don't know that I ever experienced it. That I just told people I had a sugar mama, because and of course she made so much more money than I had ever made, which was pretty awesome. So I don't know how we got that. I'm not sure if it was just because we were so poor at the beginning. We were both working, and I'm not sure how that got there for us.
I love that you described it as a partnership.
Yeah.
What you're bringing into your home together, it takes both of you to get there,
Right.
despite the route you're going individually to do that.
Yep.
And building that support system with each other and the trust. And now there's also a lot of mistrust in marriages. There could be trauma of maybe hidden expenses that someone did not know about. And so when I think about finances for people and the core emotions, I think that there's a lot of fear there. The scarcity mentality of there's not going to be enough, or from the other perspective of I'm fearful that I don't have enough things, so you're constantly buying more. And so I know that fear plays a huge role into it. And so coming to each other when you're discussing these topics at the core of what you're feeling and what you're processing helps connect you in a way, and compared to why did you spend this much money, or why are you doing this and we don't have enough, instead of saying, hey, I'm having a lot of fear that we can't pay our bill this month. How can we partner with each other to make this happen?
And typically, not always, every individual is unique, therefore every couple is unique, but typically it's a fear or a pain experience,
Right.
That it just feels painful, and there's fear in it, and to be able to convey that. And most people virtually never do that. It's all logistics. It's all, well, you spent this on, these clothes, and so I'm going to go spend this money on playing golf or whatever. And it's just this constant cycle that quickly becomes a cyclone. And I don't, were there other things that I mentioned the other day?
That was the best part of it.
Okay.
Just that we were partnering with
Good,
each other.
good. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Well, and again, understanding that you may be the one that's at home with these babies, which you co-created, by the way. This wasn't
Right.
just Tira's endeavor. So it's very much a partnership in that. And yeah, Tira's taking the time of her day, of her life, of watching these babies. But she's also very much involved in the expenditure side. And the expenditure side is as crucial, if not perhaps even more so, than the revenue generating side. So again, it's just very much a partnership that you're both involved in this. And if you're not both involved in it, there's going to be problems on a number of levels, not the least of which is just your connection. I mean, I know my parents grew up, my mother was clueless. She had no idea what was happening. And so many, and I don't know if it was a generational thing, but so many couples I heard about, the husband literally would walk in the door and announce something, that this is what we're doing. We're moving to Nebraska or whatever. I'm changing jobs and we're, buying a new house or whatever. And the wife literally didn't have a voice at all. So that by definition is going to be, a disconnecting experience.
I think too, with like a topic of money, that you may be going through different seasons in life. So, I think that early on, Tira, you worked as well before children were born, and y'all, even in your early married life, you worked and Wes worked. And, it is at times we change roles. We change, just like Glenn mentioned, when he went back to school, I said, I will support us. I want you just to focus on school. And at this point in our married life, well, since the babies came along, I had just stayed home. So I had not worked for a paycheck. And now all of a sudden I'm saying, I'm going to go build a company and I'm going to support us. A lot of fear in that for sure.
Let me just interject there. I don't know a whole lot of men, at least in this country, where the wife said, you are to quit working. And, I just admire you so much and I'm so grateful. But I also am just like mesmerized that you had because I don't know where that came from. Because and you had been hinting at me making a shift for probably a decade, and I was so just strangled with fear that I couldn't consider the possibility. but you just kind of announced it one day. But I don't know if I've shared that on the podcast yet. But Phyllis one day said, "Babe, as hard as you work, we should be rich, and we're not rich, so we have to make a change." And I just didn't know how to run a business. I worked hard. I did good work, but my specialty was making a 3-month job last 5 months for the same price, which is not a good business model. And so Phyllis just kind of, I don't know, flexed her muscle, stepped in and said, "Okay, it's time for a change." And I was delighted. I was thrilled. Again, this is pre-connection codes. We didn't really process the emotion of it, but I was so exhausted. I mean, it was debilitating for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just admire you so much that somehow you had it within you to go, "Okay, you're going to quit working." And I'm like, "Wait, what? That's a thing?" And you just handled it, which, and you more than handled it. It just still irritates me a little bit that you were so much better at business than I was. And just for the record, I have a degree in business management.
Yes, you
which
do.
is a lovely piece of paper that I have on my wall in my office. But in reality, I couldn't run a lemonade stand. So
Right.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. We had lived a very frugal life up to this point, and so we had been very financially responsible, which set us up to not be in heavily debt, and our house payment at the time was really low. So I think that gave me the courage to believe that I could support us, that I could build the company and of course, probably your first day of class and my first day of it being all me, I'm sure that I was terrified of failure.
Right.
And I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I remember just making that first step. And one of the first steps that I did was I joined a business networking group. And I had never done that before. I mean, never, because I had just been, home raising the children, homeschooling the children, all that stuff. But I knew that I had to do something different. I had to get out there and take this really serious. And so, I remember those were the first steps that I took. But I think that, in our journey with money and just being able to have a language where we could talk about all of that and be partners, be on the same page, and, be able to even share, when there needs to be a big purchase or something, I think every time that we find out, I think, the roof is leaking and you go, "Oh my word, it's going to be, $10,000 to fix it." Just to be able to process that fear and process through all of that, the sadness in that, the pain in that. And, it's when we get flooded with the emotion and we disconnect over it and fight over it, that it is just it just stays in this cyclone where then we are dumber versions of ourselves. We can't even think through, how do we now pay for this? How do we process this? And, so I think that for many couples, the topics that are those trigger topics is because we don't know the language. We don't believe it's possible.
Right.
It's almost like, oh yeah, every marriage has trigger topics and you just don't talk about it. You get to the point where you just go, oh yeah, we don't open that door. And, and I know that even for us early on, just the fact that family was a trigger topic, you could so easily just say, okay, then we just will pull away and never see family because we don't want to cause that cyclone to come along. So the way to function is to pull away.
Right.
And, I love that with the connection codes, it's actually, that is lean into it, lean into it, but you've got to have the language to communicate what is happening and for both of you to have that space. And it's, what I love is that even to this day, we're able to talk about it now where you still feel and experience the same thing that you felt and experienced almost 40 years ago. And I make space for that. I don't feel threatened by that. Or, it's I think in the early days, I just wanted you to, feel the way I felt about it, and now I just think we both make space for the experience.
Yeah.
I just want to touch real quickly, probably the one other big trigger topic that I see with couples is just their inability to connect, to communicate, that she feels like he never shares. And it's not always that direction, but I'd say the good majority of it is that the wife feels like he never shares what's happening with him, and he feels like she's always just griping and complaining, that she just is criticizing him constantly. And neither one of them know how to convey at the core as far as what's really happening.
Right. And so even like the topics itself becomes the trigger topics, it just adds to it so much. And so really listening today and realizing that when we come at each other from logistics, from the, well, you're doing it this way, or, if Wes was to come to me and be like, hey, you want to have sex tonight? Versus, hey, I'm having sexual joy thinking about you, or I'm having fear. It's been several days. I'm having fear of when the next time is going to be. That hits me differently than, hey, you want to do it? Yep. Well, no, I'm tired. Oh man, but if you're feeling fear,
but thanks for asking.
I recognize that fear. I know what that fear feels like, so I'm able to respond to him in a different way. And that doesn't even mean, like you had said earlier, that we will have sex that night. But I can tune in and be like, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what's happening with me, and this is where I can meet you there. And then even with finances, thinking about, that a woman, like I could have guilt, but he could be having financial loneliness if he's the one carrying it. Like you said, you had so much fear that initial day starting out because you had that loneliness there as well. Yeah. And so when we're talking with each other through these things that, man, cause wars with each other.
Absolutely.
That just cause huge blowouts. And I know that because I've seen it in my own home. To instead share the core of what's happening. That's where the connection comes. And when someone is sharing, be the safe person that's oohing them and listening to them, like we are about to do right now with Glenn and Phyllis as they walk through the core emotion wheel.
Yay.
Yeah.
Fun.
And again, I want to emphasize, because it's startling to us, maybe not every day anymore, but just how simple this is. This is not necessarily easy, but it's so simple and so implementable. It blows my mind. I don't have to quote the periodic table or learn fluent Latin to do this. This is just the human condition, which of course is already coded inside of us. I don't have to go somewhere and figure out what I was feeling there. It's already inside of me. I just have to learn to access it, which of course, the great segue is why we do the core emotion wheel endlessly, is to retrain us to be able to recognize the emotion, to be able to put a word to it, and to verbalize it, to convey it to another, and for them to be able to ooh us, and for us to ooh ourselves. Just to go, oh, wow, so that's what's happening with me. Okay. I wasn't trying to feel fear. I just felt some fear. I wasn't trying to feel pain. I just felt some pain. I wasn't trying to feel shame. I just felt some shame.
Yeah.
So much power in it.
So can I suggest that as y'all do this wheel, you keep it at sex, family, or finances?
I was actually thinking that. So I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you'll hear it in my sharing. So I feel a lot of anger that my parents did not teach us how to be a family that shows up for each other. They could have done things differently to have really changed that for our family of origin. Feel guilt and shame in how much we disconnected over my family, and that I didn't hear you in that. Feel definitely guilt and shame over that. Lonely, and there's moments even now that I feel lonely, because now in my family of origin, there's the text thread, but we mostly talk about sports and weather. So there's a lonely in that we really don't still at this point know how to really be and show up for each other. I feel sadness in that. And I see that it has played out with my children. They don't have the cousins, that I always dreamed that they would have, where they would be close to their cousins. Yeah. But of course, how can you be close to your cousins when your aunts and uncles aren't close to each other as well? So definitely sadness in that. And, I think the fear at times is that I'm missing that with our own kids to make sure that we are making a space for them to really show up for each other and to work through times when we disagree on topics as a family. And that, I want to make sure, I feel fear that we're not always making sure that we are prioritizing that with our kids to make sure that they do that. And I think that the hurt in it over the years was the disconnection that we would have in those times, and that I didn't always feel like you were able to hear me in that, and that my family meant so much for me. I was craving their approval. I was craving that they would love me and value me, and I think I felt hurt from you that was not, you didn't make space for that. Joy in just being able to live life with you now, and that we can talk about this even right in this moment, that we can talk about it with many people potentially listening, and that we can just be open about it. And that this is definitely, it feels raw in this moment, even talking about all the years of that, because those were some pretty huge pain points and topics that were triggers.
Yeah. For me, just starting with joy, because even as we were talking about the idea of this podcast, I'm like, triggers. Well, they are triggers, except we process them so fast. They don't sound like the traditional definition of a trigger.
Right,
I think of a trigger as leading to an explosion. And for us, there just aren't.
Right now.
Hardly ever. And
get that.
So much joy in that. A lot of guilt. Oh, I miss so much with you on any of those topics. Certainly sex. I had no idea. I was so clueless. And a lot of shame in that. I'm thinking, how was I such a bad version of a partner for you? I mean, I'm a really smart guy. I was dumb as a brick. Just because I was not educated in it as far as sexuality, but also because I was so flooded, with emotion that I couldn't even think straight. And I wounded you so many times through that. A lot of anger in that. I think core level anger, because I'm like, come on, people. We're an advanced civilization. We ought to be able to handle this culturally. And I know it looks different than it did 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I'm not sure that it's much better. People, sex is an open topic now, but I don't see a whole lot of couples who are having dynamic sexual connection. And that's one of my dreams, is to shift this culturally. A lot of hurt in that, even certainly for us, but even culturally, that there's so much wounding, so much damage. We just don't talk to couples. Like, you'll figure it out. Which of course the message that your mom said to you many years later, I just thought you'd figure it out. And I think, dang, we got to do better than this. And a lot of sadness in that, again, for culture, but for us, that, how much time did we lose? And the trauma of it. How much are we affected today by the things that happened 30 years ago? And we're deeply connected, but we're still affected by the trauma in it. And there's fear at times, just that something's going to happen because of the trauma that happened 27 years ago. And lonely, we get busy. I think that's probably the only time I feel sexual loneliness, is we are just so busy, which is awesome. And the connection codes are spreading around the world, and we're having a blast with it. But then I realized that, we've been so busy that we haven't had any time. We're getting away, whatever that is, in 3 weeks or something. For the first time, I think it's in 9 months. We're like,
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay, good. But it's just stunning. It's like, how do we manage that? Because we believe in getting away regularly, part of which is great sexual playtime. And we look up and it's like, dang, 9 months went by. How did that happen? So cool.
Wow. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. That's always incredible to hear and to take part in. So thank you for that. I know that this conversation's opened up conversations for people that are listening. I know that maybe you may be thinking differently about how you're presenting these topics in your home, how you're approaching these topics in your home, and realizing, we've been missing on this for a long time.
Absolutely.
And so hopefully today it started that new way of thinking, of coming at things from the emotion and not the logistics. And that's how healing comes. And there is so much more to how to do this. This is truly, you're getting just the tip of the iceberg of what it looks like to share these things. There's just so much out there. So thank you for being here today, because every time you come to listen, there's something new that you're going to gain from this. Yeah. And if you have not already left us a 5-star review or shared this podcast with your friends, please do so. That helps us get the word out. We've already seen thousands of lives transformed, and we want to keep that going. We want it to not only affect your marriage, but affect your family, because that is how y'all can start to really conquer these things together as a whole unit.
Well, and I'd love to mention, Tara, at this point, that we would love to be on your podcast.
Oh,
If you are a listener and you have a podcast, we would love to be on your podcast to talk about Connection Codes, to talk about any topic that Connection Codes covers. Or you may know someone that has a podcast. We would love to have an introduction to their podcast.
Yeah, that is awesome. Cool. That would be so good. And I will share this one more resource. I'll leave it up for this time being, because we talked about sex today, and we had a conversation about the emotions in sex a few weeks ago. And that is still live on our website. You can go to connectioncodes.co/sex talk and get a conversation of all the emotions that we have experienced going into our sexual relationships. So thank you again for being here. Glenn, you want to get us out?
We want to make sure you know that you need this.
You deserve this.
So let's
do this.
Let's do this.